I had the opportunity to sit down with my friend Alex Picard, who is an audiobook narrator. What follows is the footage of that interview. Whether you're someone who aspires to become an audiobook narrator, or if you just consume audiobooks, I think you're going to get a lot from this interview. When I understand more about an art form, I am able to appreciate it so much more, and I learned a ton about the whole process. And I hope that at the end of this, you'll look for some of Alex's books, or maybe her alias's books. I hope you give them a listen. Thank you so much and enjoy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Alex Picard, and I have a background in theater. So I went to college, well, to study elementary education, so that didn't work out. But my master's degree is in acting, and I taught theater at various levels, high school and college, for about 23 years, and have performed professionally and otherwise for about as many years as well. So I have this very large theater background, much more theater than TV or film. So that's kind of my history and where I come from. And I'm also I'm an avid reader, always have been. I'm a real lover of books and getting lost in them. And so somewhere in the middle of the pandemic with a lot of other people, I found myself with a little time on my hands. And I have this really good friend who is an audiobook narrator. His name is Peter Burkrot, and he's had like over 500 titles and has done just a ton of work and all of that. And I'd known him for many, many years, and he was taking students. He was doing some coaching if you wanted to learn how to narrate. And I thought it sounded cool to me. I like audiobooks, so I thought it sounded interesting. So I did some coaching from there, and then long story short, things just took off from there, and now this is what I do full time.
Yeah, that's amazing. It seems like every time I turn around, you're announcing another book that you have coming out. So it seems like things are going really well for you.
They were. I'm getting there, right? It's a process. You got to build relationships with the people you work with, and the producers and publishers and independent authors and all of that. So I've laid some groundwork over the last couple of years is the best way to put it. And this year it really started taking off. So last year, 2021, was my first, I'll call it my first official year. I did some work in 2020, but my first official year was last year. And I was still working full time as a college professor. So which is a lot. So I only narrated about 5 titles last year with publishers. And that felt just right, with all the other stuff that I had going on. And this spring was my last semester with the college. And I had 5 books by the time we were in April. So it took off in January in a lot of ways.
Was it planned to stop with the college, or were you
I had been looking for a change for a while, and needing a change. But teaching is a lot, as I'm sure you know, and a lot of people know. And 23 years of it was a lot. So I was ready for a change and kind of needing one for a variety of reasons. So it just kind of worked out that this found its way into my life around the same time that I was looking to find something to move into. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is the audition process like? How do you end up, so you took this coaching course.
Yep.
And then how does it work from there?
It actually can go a bunch of different ways. People find their ins really differently. Mine was really, I was very lucky. My in was very, very lucky. One of the things that you can do is there's a website called ACX, which is attached to Audible. And you can go on ACX, and authors can put their books on ACX and ask, these are for indie authors or otherwise, and ask narrators to audition, and narrators will audition for those titles. You get it or you don't, and then you make an agreement with that author, and you record the book. A lot of times when you're working on ACX, not all the time, but a lot of times you're also not just in charge of narrating the book, but also editing and mastering and proofing that book and making sure the files are completely ready to be loaded under the specs of ACX. Findaway is another website that does the same thing. They just merged with Spotify. So that's why you can get your audiobooks on Spotify now. And so, those are both sort of like routes that people sometimes get started with. I got started with an organization called Learning Ally, which is a fantastic organization that brings audiobooks to students with reading disabilities or other issues with reading. And it's volunteer work. So my first book was volunteer. I just wanted to kind of get my feet wet. And they gave me this really lovely book to narrate. So I did that for them. And that was kind of my end. So sometimes, you'll hear people, oh, I started at Learning Ally, or I started on ACX, or I started on Findaway, and those are kind of different ins that you can get to the whole business, I guess, right?
Sure.
But my journey was a little bit different in that I did the book with ACX. I had also joined the Audiobook Publishers Association, and that organization has a lot of education for narrators and producers and the like. And they hold an event called speed dating, which I was not on the prowl. It's a really different kind of speed dating where you basically, as a narrator, you can throw your name in the ring. You're put in this big lottery. And they will pick and choose a group of narrators out of that lottery. And you are invited to give a 3-minute pitch to a bunch of publishers and producers. So you show up in a Zoom room just like this, and there's all these screens that are blank because they have their cameras off, so you don't have to see anybody, right? So they've all got their cameras off and yours is on. And they bring you into the room on Zoom, and there's all these people there, and you have 3 minutes to kind of you're not reading for them. It's not necessarily an audition in that way, but to tell them who you are. Right? Because a lot of finding the right narrator for the right book is about the experiences that you have in your life, right? So I told them that I had been a teacher for 23 years, right? That's like, there's an education book or a book about a teacher, or a teacher is a character. That's something I can authentically bring to that book, right? I told them that I was a runner, that I, like any little tidbit that makes you goes into that 3 minutes. So I basically tried to let them know exactly who I was in 3 minutes. And then you're done. And that's that. And I reached out to those people, and some of them reached out to me, and we form, you start to form relationships. And that audition process is very much like being a working actor or anywhere else. You are sent an audition. They'll be like, hey, would you like to submit an audition for this book? So if a publisher emails me and says, I'd like you to audition for this book, I send in the audition if it's something that I'm interested in. And it usually just like a 2-3 minute selection that they either choose, or that they say just read from the first page or two or whatever. I send that in to them, and then I wait to hear. And either I hear, congratulations, the book is yours, or usually you just don't hear. Right. And so you just you wait for one of your friends to release the book and you celebrate them, which is actually really great. So I always love seeing something that I liked, that I auditioned for, going to one of my friends who is so good at what they do. Like it always becomes this perpetual celebration, right? Because the audiobook community, I think, is probably one of the greatest communities I've ever had the privilege of belonging to.
So that has been something that has really surprised me. So I have followed you on Instagram, and so we'll have all of your information linked below. But I was surprised at the different, well, you just went to a conference, right? With different narrators and whatnot. And I guess I imagine a narrator, of course, sitting in a studio like you're sitting right
in
now.
Isolation. Yeah.
Reading, exactly. Like we've all been through the pandemic and that sort of thing, just complete isolation. And I didn't expect all of these relationships in this community.
It is a stunningly wonderful community. And I really, truly mean that. Like, I'm a runner, and I thought the running community was awesome, but this one is just, it puts it to shame. There are, it's so supportive and genuine and caring and all of, I a lot of it is isolating, right? We do sit in these booths, all day and talk to ourselves, and then emerge to our families exhausted and, and all of that. So there is an amount of isolation to it, but I've got, for instance, in that when I went to speed dating, there was a list of emails from these other narrators that went too. And one of my friends, Melissa, sent out an email that said, hey, we're all in speed dating together. Who wants to jump on a Zoom afterwards just to process what happened and see how things went and just say congratulations? And then we were all like, yeah. So we had this Zoom meeting and I virtually met some of these people who are my friends to this day. So, I just started forming these online relationships. You go to workshops online or classes online, and that sort of thing. And you sort of meet each other that way. And when I went to that, it was a retreat, the New England Narrators Retreat run by Johnny Heller. That was the first time I had met friends that I'd had for 2 years. So it was awesome. and it was an opportunity for us. We had 4 days of professional development, right? Coming together and reading for coaches and having directed reading sessions and going to different sessions about, elements of narrating, like how to self-direct and different kinds of narration, like e-learning and, just also a range of topics, and then we got to eat together and spend time together. And it was fantastic. So there are opportunities for us to get together, and usually when they exist, we take them because you need it.
So, and that retreat is for established narrators rather than somebody who's trying to break into it. Is that correct? That's what it sounds like?
Not necessarily. There were some people that were at that retreat that didn't have very many books or were just getting started, and some that were there that have hundreds upon hundreds of books and are fully established, and literally everything in between. I'm very much toward the beginning end of that spectrum, so it's everybody, but you don't, there's never been a point, at least not to this day, that I have ever felt like I wasn't part of the community because I didn't have as many books as anybody else, and that's the great part of it. We're all doing the same thing every day, right? Like we all have to audition and we all have to wait and see, and we all have to prep the book and record the book, and it's this, the same work. We're just operating on different levels.
So how do you prepare for a reading when you have the book, you've got the job? What do you do?
So this is one of my favorite parts because I love prepping a book. The nice thing about when you get the job, you immediately get a prep script, is what you're sent, which is a PDF of the book. And it is, with that script, that's what I use to mark up the whole thing. And my favorite thing about that is that I get to read it before most anyone else. It just feels like a little secret coming to my inbox, So I prep books on my iPad. I have an app called iannotate that I use. So I have a pencil, and I'm reading the book, but I'm also, not just reading for the story and the content and all of that, but I'm marking up, I'm highlighting words I don't know so that I can look them up. I am looking for pronunciations of any complicated words or words I've never heard of, or words in another language that I need to have correct pronunciations of. I'm making notes on characters, and who they are, what they might sound like, what they're going after, what they need and want, their journey in the story. You're making notes on each chapter and what's happening. Depending on what kind of book it is, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or historical or contemporary, you might be looking up, things that happened in the world at that time, right? Like what environment were they in? I might do some research on that, right? I'm prepping a book right now where part of the book takes place in 2044 and part of the book takes place in 1986. So I just did a little digging on where were we at in 86? Now I personally remember 86, but not everybody does, right? So, so what was happening in that time politically and all other ways that, might influence those characters or what's going on, right? I did this book called Dance Among the Flames by Tori Eldridge, really beautiful, beautiful book. She's a wonderful writer and a lovely human being to boot. And it had all of this Portuguese in it. These characters were Brazilian, and I have Portuguese heritage, which worked to my advantage because I have a good ear for Portuguese. And I can output it pretty well. Which was something I had mentioned in that speed dating, that I had Portuguese heritage. And I think that's part of why I got that audition, because they were, oh yeah, Alex is Portuguese. She could probably handle these because there was a significant amount of it. So in that book, I was doing a lot of like, okay, double checking my pronunciations and going to different websites and comparing and say which one, okay, this one is the one I'm going to use, and right, like making sure you've got all the information you need. The better prepared you are with that script, the easier it is to do your job once you climb into the booth, right? I don't want to have to stop the flow of the story or what's happening in the story to quick look something up or go, oh, wait, I didn't notice that, or you know what I mean? So like the more markings I make, I will mark for, pauses that need to be in place, for, important punctuation that I need to pay attention to. Sometimes, depending on the book, I will also highlight characters in different colors, their dialogue. So like main character might be like a turquoise, and like, the person that she is speaking to is blue, if their dialogue is in blue. I usually only do that if it's a conversation with multiple people. It's a little easier for me to code switch, right? So if I have to go from one voice to another, to another, to another, that color helps me go, right, that's where I am for that voice, and blue makes me remember the other one. I will also do that through the whole book too, if it's a lot of accents. I just released a book called The Fire in the Glass by Jacquelyn Benson, which is that's a stunning book. We could have a whole hour about that one. But anyway, it was tons of accents, right? The narration is all in received pronunciation, so standard British. There are characters who were Chinese, Scottish, Irish.
Oh my goodness.
There was some Middle Irish in there, so the Scottish guy had to speak Gaelic, so that was tricky. So you're doing a lot of markings to make sure you've got everything ready, so that when I land in the booth, I can focus on story and character and the emotional life of the book, and not be distracted by things I don't understand or know. I have a little holder for my iPad, and it sits at eye level, so I'm sitting up nice and straight, and I've got my mic here, and this is where I do all my reading.
Okay. So how much say does the author have in your voices and whatnot?
It kind of depends on who you're doing the book with. So if a publisher reaches out to me and says, can you audition for this book? And I audition and I receive that book, I do not speak to that author. So if I have questions for the author about the book, I ask the publisher gets in touch with the author and then gets those, like if I have like, how do you pronounce this name, or how do they want that pronounced? Like if it's a sci-fi book and there's made up words and names, they'll provide me with that from the author. But it is not, it's not for me to reach out directly to the author. And in fact, that's a little bit frowned upon, right? This is a different thing. So a lot of times these authors don't hear their full book until I'm done with it and I've made all those choices, because I'm the narrator, so I'm the artist. So there's that creative freedom that I'm creating that world, and that they're trusting me to do that. And if there's important things they want to hear from the book, they'll put it in the audition, right? There's that character that they want to hear or something like that.
And so you're not sharing those files with the publisher beforehand either. So you're just kind of doing the entire thing, and then
I do the whole thing. And when I'm done with my files, I send them off. And then there's a whole nother process after that. It's a little different if you're working with an independent author, right? Because then I might send, usually in that situation, you'll send, you'll audition, they'll say, awesome, let's do this. And then I will send them a 15-minute sample. And in that 15-minute sample, it can be whatever they want to hear. So if there's different scenes from different characters that they want to hear first, I'll put that in there. Like I'll ask, like, what do you want? Who do you need to hear, and what do you need to hear before we move forward? And then sometimes, so I'll send that 15-minute sample and they'll say, oh my gosh, this was great. But like this character, I kind of was thinking we could go, it's a little bit more like this. They tend to be a little bit more like this. And I'll say, great, let me take another crack at it. I re-record that part. I send it again. They approve it. And then after that, I just go, and they don't hear it again until it's done. So there's a little more interaction there, right? So when I work with an independent author, I'm talking to them more about, what they'd like to hear. And if I have questions, I can go straight to them, because it's a one-on-one relationship, and they might be publishing that book themselves, so it's a little bit different.
Is there an opportunity to reject a recording? Has that ever happened? Have you heard of that happening?
It does happen. I don't think it happens all that often. Thankfully, not to me yet. But it can. But there's contracts, right? So when you enter into this agreement, you both sign a contract, and that contract delineates very clearly, at what point either party can leave the project. And there's also a point where, like, if the narrator has done almost half the book, there's still money owed to that narrator for work completed if you're deciding to move, right? So the contracts have like all these details about protecting the narrator and protecting the author, and making sure the finished product is exactly what everybody wants it to be.
Okay. So what do you do any warm-ups for your voice when you're going into the studio? What is your process like? Are there any things that you do to protect your voice, like dietary things or?
Yeah, no dairy on recording days. So I'm not recording today, so I am having yogurt and all the butter, and like I love non-recording days for the dairy. Like maybe some ice cream later, because it just tends to clog, like mucusy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You don't want to be dealing with that. I warm up every time I come into the booth, so I just kind of have a routine. I come down. This is a really decent size booth. Like, do not be misled. Most booths are tiny, tiny things. My husband built this booth for me, and he really understood the assignment. So he built, it's a really big space. So I can actually come in here and stretch and, roll up and down my spine and do all my vocal warm-ups right in the space, which is nice because you make weird noises when you warm up vocally, and you don't always want everybody in the house listening to that. So I come down and I always have my huge trusty water bottle with me, and I always have chapstick with me and like other little things that I need. And then I do my vocal warm up. I get myself ready. I make sure I've got my iPad ready to go. I make sure that if there are any things that I might need while I'm recording, so like I'll keep the Merriam-Webster tab open because I'm, just in case there's a word that sneaks up where I'm like, is that right? I can listen to pronunciations, things like other tabs that I might need, any prep notes on the book that I want to keep handy while I'm recording. I'll have all of that open so that I've got everything I need with me once I hit the road and go.
How long do you tend to spend in your studio?
It depends on the day and it depends on the book. I actually, so this is going to sound like it's not a ton, but it really is. I shoot for one finished hour of audio each workday.
Well, and that was actually one of my questions, was how much time goes into it. And it sounds like depending on what company you're working with, you're sometimes also doing the editing and whatnot. So yes. What is that conversion roughly?
Roughly. I do not do a lot of my own editing, mastering, or proofing. And there are a lot of narrators who do, but there are a lot that don't. We source it out. Like, so if an indie author comes to me and says, I'd like to do this book with you, and can you handle all the post-production? I'll still say yes, but I will send it to an engineer that I work with and have them do that post-production. And then I just send the finished files, and then they pay me, I pay him. And I build into my fee his pay, if that makes sense. So that is not something that's like built into my time. I think that if I had to do all of that, it would take considerably longer. I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, well, yeah, that would take a lot longer. But I would say that I sit anywhere, again, depending on the book and how many accents and the content and all of that sort of thing, it can be anywhere from 2 to 3 hours per finished hour.
Okay.
Right. So, when a book has a lot of accents, or the one I had to do that was all in RP, that's a lot more stopping, because I'm not just making corrections for mistakes I make while I'm reading. I'm also making accent corrections and those sorts of things. And because it's not my natural accent. And so I'll have to, change that stuff up. And that takes just a little bit more time, but every narrator's a little different, how long it takes us to get through the material and other things that you've got going on and whatever. But I don't like to be in my booth any more than 6 hours a day, because
that's a long time.
Even 6 is like so much. That's a long day in the booth, because it's still a small room and you have to sit still, and it's a performance. You're fully performing the book. So it's a lot of energy and a lot of focus and all of those things. So if I've been in here for 6 hours, I am exhausted when I am done, so
Do
I
you
try to
find
keep
it
it smaller.
do you find it difficult to sit still and not let the excitement kind of overtake you? And
Oh, I still do. It still does. I fully remember not too long ago, I like gesticulated when I was narrating and I hit my microphone and I was like, oh my God, like calm down. So it can happen, but really what I try to do, like I will definitely use my arms, but like that's not making any noise if I keep them up and away from everything I'm doing, so that I can, because I kind of assume a little bit of a physicality for each character too, even though I'm not like, somebody might have a dip in the shoulder or like a whatever. So I can stay on mic and be still in my body so that you're not hearing me rub against my clothes or like against the desk or whatever. But I can still be invested in what I'm doing. Every once in a while, I just like accidentally, I'll like do something and hit the table and I'm like, oh, gotta go back.
it sounds like with your highlighting system and that sort of thing that you're able to kind of keep them ordered. But do you find yourself accidentally making mistakes as to who's talking, or
Oh yeah.
do you feel like sometimes I was imagining before that you can imagine starting a book with one kind of voice, one pitch in the voice or accent, and then by the end of it you've kind of slid to something entirely different? Is that something that you
with accents, I'm really careful with those, so because you want them to sound as, that's the character's natural voice, so you want to be really careful of staying in that. So I'll stop long before it starts to dip into something else. Yeah, it can happen. Like, and sometimes I'm, reading along and I'll be in dialogue and I'll be like, oh, that's the wrong person. Like that wasn't their voice. Like that's the, and you go back and you just kind of clear it up and all of that. But yeah, it's absolutely, that stuff does happen. It's a lot to keep track of,
Sure.
and especially if there's like a group in the room, you're like, wait, who was that? And so I'll accidentally slipped into the wrong person's voice or something like that. Like sometimes that happens most often for me when I'm saying the name of another character as another character. I might accidentally see the name and do that voice instead of the one I'm supposed to be doing. So that kind of happens every once in a while too. But yeah, I mean, mistakes are made. You mispronounce things, you switch up words or invert them or whatever. And most narrators use punch and roll recording. So I have a recording software on my computer that sits on the monitor. So like I sit here and face my iPad and then the monitor has my DAW recording and it records along as I read. And if I mess something up, I stop recording. I can look at the sound wave. I punch in to just before the mistake. And what happens then is I'll hit record and I'll hit go. And I will hear the last 5 seconds that I recorded before the mistake happened. So I know where I am emotionally, in the voice, in the tone of the moment, all of that's the volume, all of that. I can hear it for 5 seconds and then I just keep going and keep recording until I make my next mistake. And then I punch in again. And so they call that punch and roll. So that's kind of how you just kind of chug like this,
Cool.
forward.
So what kind of equipment do you need to get started?
So you need a mic. And I would not recommend if you're getting started using a USB mic because you can get those a lot for like podcasts and things like that. I would recommend one that you can plug into an IO interface. So I have a Vanguard V4 mic. That's my mic. And then I have over here in the corner a Focusrite Scarlett IO interface. So that's where my mic gets plugged into and my headphones get plugged into, right? So that's where my input and my output are through that. And then that connects to the computer so that everything goes into my Mac Mini and gets recorded the way it should. So you at least need decent headphones, a decent microphone, usually a diaphragm cardioid mic is best for this kind of voice work, and an IO interface and a computer. And then that's all you technically need.
Okay.
But I would argue that even more important than that is a good space to record in, because it doesn't matter how good your equipment is if your sound of the room that you're in isn't good. right? So if you can hear every truck going by on the street outside, if you can hear the washing machine running, if you can hear my children running through the house, it doesn't matter how good the equipment is, the recording won't be usable. You know, when I first started, when I did that book with Learning Ally, I was in my closet. A lot of narrators start there. I mean, there's many that have.
My home office is a closet, so I hear you.
Right. Yeah. Right. So I actually had my mother-in-law makes quilts, lots of quilts. So I hung up with like, you know, clips like my husband has for construction or whatever, building stuff. I would just clip these quilt blankets all over the closet surrounding me to dampen some sound, and the clothes stayed, so they would dampen sound. And I'd close the door and hung another quilt in front of the door to dampen that sound from what's outside there. And I recorded in that happy little closet as best I could, you know. And then I just kind of got to a point where I was like, this isn't going to work anymore. I'm not going to be able to get the kind of work that I want to get and work with the kind of publishers and producers that I want to work with unless I have a solid booth. And that's when we, you know, we talked about purchasing a booth, which you can. There are companies out there like Whisper Booths and Studio Bricks and different companies like that that will sell, you know, VO booths that you can just put wherever in your home. We happen to have a decent sized basement that had some room, and we did a ton of research about how to keep, you know, these walls quiet. So this room is actually a room within a room. So on the floor, on the basement floor, there's rubber. On that are the 2x4s for the floor of the room. But it's a box in a box. So there's a floor and walls and a ceiling that doesn't touch. So the floor doesn't touch the floor and the ceiling doesn't touch the ceiling. And then there's a room inside of that, and it's double drywalled, and there's green glue, which is sound dampening through the whole thing. And then of course I've got all my foam up on the walls and that sort of, so there's 2 doors. This door opens and then another one opens the other way.
How long did it take you to set that up?
It took a couple months. I think it took a couple months. I mean, my husband's a pilot, so he was home during the pandemic. He wasn't really flying a lot.
Oh, right.
He flies corporate. So the CEO was like, well, we're not going anywhere. So he just was home for a lot. So he had a lot of time to attend to it. He did a great job because you often have to send a sample when you're working with like a new producer or publisher. You have to send a sample of your studio sound. So like just silence in the studio along with your voice as well. So like 30 seconds of silence and then some narration. And I send that for approval, and they check the levels of the sound and whether or not it passes their requirements for what they need on their end. So far I've never had an issue with that. So it's working.
Cool. In terms of contract, and I was wondering, I know obviously what an author gets paid kind of depends on book sales and that sort of thing. Are your earnings tied to book sales as well, or is it just one fixed fee? Does it vary if you've got a ton of different accents? As you were saying, that takes more time.
Yeah, it doesn't often, right? So, but it can work both ways. So if I might be working, let's say I like found an author I'm going to work with on ACX. That author and I might enter into what we call a royalty share agreement, which means that instead of being paid upfront for the recording, once that book is out there in the world, the money comes in from the book, I get a portion and the author gets a portion. And so we share that royalty as it moves forward. So that's one way that you can get paid. The other way is that it's narrators are paid per finished hour. So if it's a 10-hour book, I'm paid for the 10 hours. So that includes my prep and any research I've done and the pre-read and all of that. So like that fee includes basically all of that stuff, but I'm only paid the actual hours that the book is that lasts, right? So 10-hour book, I get paid for 10. And that's pretty much the 2 ways that it works. I mostly work for the flat fee. I have not yet done a royalty share book, but I would if I found the right project. You know, if you really believe in the book, you believe in the author, and you think it's going to do well, then it can be a really great way to go, royalty share.
What has been your favorite experience narrating a book? And you don't need to get specific about book titles or anything like that, but you can if you'd like.
I know. Well, I'm really lucky. I have a lot of really beautiful stories under my belt, and I'm very grateful. I've met a lot of beautiful authors and been able to read a lot of beautiful stories. And there was an experience recently that I just really enjoyed quite a bit for a couple of reasons. One is that it was absolutely a book that I would have picked to read myself, right? Because not always when you're narrating are you going, oh, this is what I would read anyway. Like sometimes you're reading, like, I don't know, I've never read in this genre before, but here we go, right? It's certainly a book I would have picked myself. So I was already invested in, oh, like, great, this is like, because it was a historical fantasy and it was like so fun. I love that stuff. But anyway, that was nice, right? So then as I dug into it, two things happened. One is that I became so invested in these characters. And I'm sure like anybody who is an avid reader, anything to do with books, you totally understand what I mean when I say that I have lost sleep over fictional characters.
Absolutely.
Right? Are you with like lost sleep? I have cried with them. I have it like, right. And you yell at them sometimes too, right? Like, what are you thinking? Don't do it. Don't like, oh my God, why are you doing that? Like all that stuff. Now, the funny thing is by the time I get in the booth, I know how the story ends already. And I still am like, what are you doing? Like, so this particular book, I had this really lovely mix of characters that were cracking me up, making me cry. There were several times when I was recording the book that I had to stop recording because I was too emotionally. I was crying and you couldn't hear what I was saying. So I had to wait and chill out a minute and get back to it. And so there was an emotional investment that meant a lot to me, but it was also a blast because like I would yell at the characters. I would like hit a mistake. I'd stop recording. I'd be, what are you thinking? Right. And I'd get back and I'd record again. I'm like, oh my God, they did it again. Like, and that sort of thing. There are points, like if something's funny in a book and I read it and it lands, I'm like, oh my God, that was pretty funny. Like, or a character will crack me up, like great punchline or any of those things. And that particular book was just a ton of fun because I found it so very easy to be immersed in the world of it. That's not a hard thing for me to do anyway. I'm kind of a feeler. I feel my way through the world. But in that particular story, it was an absolute blast. It was a lot of work, but it was an absolute blast.
I actually think I saw an Instagram story or something from you where you were talking about yelling at a character. So
yeah, it was that book. It was that book. Yeah, I was just literally yelling because you feel like you're aiding and abetting in a little bit of way. Like, I didn't want to yell at that guy, but you made me yell at that guy because I have to do it because it's here on the page and I don't like it. Don't make me yell at him. He didn't deserve that. It's yeah, I love that level of investment. And it just, I'm just the luckiest human, I think, to do what I do because I've always loved books. I thoroughly love performing. This is the marriage of both of those things in a way that I never would have imagined for myself, so it's allowing all this training to be useful in a way that is really beautiful to me. I love the work, and every book has a little bit something that makes it special and great and fun and all of that, even with nonfiction titles, you're learning something, whatever it is that you're reading about, you are learning about that thing. And these are certainly things I wouldn't be like, oh, let me figure out this, but I'm like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Like you're just, you can absorb all of that. So, yeah, I love it's the best job in the world.
What's the hardest part about narrating? Or your least favorite thing?
Pickups. I don't like pickups. I do and I don't. So pickups are once I'm done recording and I send in my files, those are raw files. They're not mastered, they're not proofed, they're not anything. That's just what I did in the booth, right? The punch and roll record that I did. I send that out to the producer, that goes to their post-production team. That team then proofreads the book. So there's somebody that is listening to me and reading along at the same time. And the proofer just marks every mistake that you made that you didn't catch. And what they'll send you is a pickup packet. And so what you get in your pickup packet is the script with the highlighted mistakes. You'll get a voice reel that has the original audio so that you can hear what you sounded like when you made the mistakes. Because when I correct that mistake, if I say something like she went to the store and it was supposed to be she went to the mall, right? I know what I sounded like, and I can voice match that correction so that it will fit when they take that mistake, that fixed mistake, and they put it in with the rest of the audio. It doesn't sound out of place or time or jarring for the listener's ear, right? I want to match that tone and that intonation and all of that as exactly as I can. So you get the mistakes, you get the audio reel that you can listen to, that voice match. And you just go through and you record your mistakes. And I like it and I don't like it for a couple of reasons. It's my least favorite because it is, I think, the hardest for me, and there are narrators out there who love pickups, and I will never judge that. But for me, I find it hardest because it's hard to focus. There's nothing to get invested in, if that makes sense. Like there's no narrative to get invested in. It's just one little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And it's a lot of multitasking, right? This and then record and then stop and then look at the next mistake and record and then stop. Like, so it's a very different style of working than when you're in the booth with the book. So that's kind of my least favorite. And then some days it's hard physically. Like some days it's just like, if your back hurts just right, or you're tired or something like that. Just sometimes, some days go better than others. Some days I'm in here and I am as focused as I can be, and it just goes like a dream. And other days I can't get my act together and I have to take breaks, and I take breaks anyway. You can't just sit here the whole 6 hours. You have to get up and move around and get a snack and drink some water and all that. But yeah, some days are trickier. And so those days are no fun. The days where nothing seems to be aligning are really, really tricky. But yeah, but no regrets on it either way. Even the tough days are still good.
What is the most surprising thing about being a narrator? Something someone wouldn't expect?
Oh, that's a great question. God, you've stumped me, Jillian. I don't know what's surprising, but I'm like, there's nothing surprising about this, but I guess it's because I'm in it. I think maybe it might be just the process of it, like what happens to those files when I'm done, or how we correct ourselves as we go along. It's not just a straight record. Sometimes it is. If you're working with an engineer and a director, at a studio, they'll just do a straight record and they'll edit it all out later. But I think that, there is so much continual education needed as a narrator, right? So, I've been in the theater for 20 plus years, and I have a lot of training, and I have a degree, and I have worked with wonderful acting coaches, and I am still taking classes, and I am still refining things. I'm, working with accent coaches. I'm taking a course in the spring, that's over the course of a bunch of weeks with different assignments. And there's a lot of learning that takes place. You can't just get in a booth and read a book. There's just a lot more to it. And so there is this continual education so that you're always refining and sharpening those skills. And every class you take, every move you make to sharpen those skills just heightens your ability. And then you get that next great book, right? It all just sort of perpetually feeds itself. But there is a lot of work outside of this booth that takes place before I can climb into it. It's not just this every day, and you have to hustle. This is work I hustle for, and it's feast or famine, like any other hustle kind of work, right? Like when you're an independent contractor, it's feast or famine, right? You either got a ton of books coming up or you got nothing. And you have to figure that flow out. And that can be really tricky too. And that happens to like the best of us and the newest of us, seasoned and not. Like we're all looking for the next job, and looking for that next class and that next way to be educated and to refine what we do and all of that.
I can enjoy something so much more once I understand what goes into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, and I also know that there's the team of people that is working on that. The beautiful thing about audiobooks, I think, is the intimacy of it. It is one person, me, telling one person a story. It's just me in your ear. And I love the intimacy of that, right? I'm not talking to a huge audience. I'm not, sharing it with the world. It's just you and me, right? And it's just, this beautiful interaction, right? But to get me to that point, to get me in your ear, bud, it takes, the producer, the publisher, the the proofer, the engineers that work so hard to make those edits sound so beautiful, that work hard to make me sound beautiful, the people that are prepping those scripts, getting them ready, like if there's a multicast audiobook, right, which I'm going to be recording the week after Thanksgiving, I'm recording a multicast. And that's one director that is coming into my booth via Zoom that is working with me one day, another actor another day, because we each have our own chapters of the book. And coordinating all of that so that I know what those other characters are going to sound like. They know what my character is going to sound like. So they match up a little bit, or as best we can, right? And making sure that the whole book is moving in the right direction. So there's directors, producer, like engineers, proofer. It's an insane amount of people. Then the people that are marketing it and like sending it out into the world. For me to be in your earbud is just a huge team of people and a lot of hours. Just a lot of work.
What is one piece of advice that you would give somebody who was interested in becoming a narrator?
I would go online and I would look up two things. One is narratorroadmap.com, which is a beautiful website, which was built by the amazing Karen Comans. She calls herself a share-rater, which I think is brilliant. And Narrator Roadmap just has a ton of information. Like if you're just wanting to get started, it's like a library for narrators, and new narrators, as well as very well-established ones, use Narrator's Roadmap all the time. I use it consistently. Just tons of great information that she curates and puts all in one place for us, so we don't have to try and find it ourselves. So that's one resource. Another really good one is if you go on YouTube, you can find Sean Pratt's video, So You Want to Become a Narrator. And in that video, what you will hear is a very true piece of advice, that if you really want to do this for a living, you need to take a book, go sit in your closet and read it out loud and in its entirety. And every time you make a mistake, go back to the beginning of the sentence and start again. And then you'll know if you have what it takes to do this, and that even won't give you all the information, but it's a solid start. You need to know that you can sit in this room and do that work. And it's hard. It's good work, but it's hard.
And where can everyone find you?
So I have a website, which is just alexpicard.com. And I am on TikTok, making videos about yelling at my characters. And my handle there is Sounds Like Alex. On Instagram, It's Sounds Like Alex. And I'm on Twitter too, AlexPicard24, I think is my Twitter handle. So that's kind of where I am. And I am Instagram and TikTok is mostly narration stuff. I don't tweet as much, but I'm on there occasionally with one thing or another. And you can look me up on Audible. You can just search for the narrator. You can search Alex Picard. If you're up for something saucier, you can search my pseudonym, who does different books.
Interesting.
Yes, she only has one title right now, but it had some saucy, it's a romance with some spicy content. So if you're into that sort of thing, you can look up Lexi Crusher, and there will be another book that sounds suspiciously like me.
I think I might have to go look that up.
I know. Well, there's a lot of narrators that do that. A lot of us have pseudonyms because if we want to keep books separate, like stuff that has spicy content, any erotica or anything like that, romance novels, then you might want to keep that separate from, if you're doing kids books or you don't want anybody to accidentally fall upon the other if they're searching for you. So a lot of people will do that. But yeah, you can just search Audible for Alex Picard. You'll see everything I've got released so far. And I have several books coming out over the next coming weeks. So that'll be exciting too.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on here.
You are so welcome. It was so nice to see you and chat with you.
So good to see you too.